Welcome to our channel. Today, we delve into the silent corridors of the human psyche to explore a phenomenon often misunderstood and pathologized. We are looking at the deliberate choice of solitude, a state that society frequently conflates with the painful ache of loneliness. But as we will uncover, wanting to be alone isn't a sign of deficiency. Rather, it can be a profound act of psychological reclamation. In a world that demands constant visibility, choosing the shadows is a radical stance. We will examine the dark undercurrents of this desire, stripping away the social stigma to find the power hidden in isolation. It's about the deep, dark process of finding who you are when nobody else is looking.
Loneliness is a hunger, a distressing feeling that one's social connections are insufficient. It is a state of lack, an emptiness that seeks to be filled. However, aloneness, or solitude, is a state of presence. It is the ability to be with oneself without the need for external validation or the noise of the crowd. While loneliness is a forced exile, solitude is a chosen sanctuary. We often see people who prefer their own company as broken or antisocial, yet behavioral science suggests that those who thrive in solitude often possess a deeper level of self-awareness. They are not running away from people, they are running toward a more authentic version of themselves, far from the gaze of the tribe.
From a clinical perspective, there is a certain dark gravity to this preference because it defies the fundamental human drive for tribal belonging. Society views the solitary individual with suspicion because they cannot be easily controlled or influenced by peer pressure. When you do not need the approval of the group, you become a wild card. This independence is frightening to the collective. We pathologize the loner because their self-sufficiency highlights the fragility of our own social dependencies. The dark psychology here involves the shedding of the social mask, a process that is both liberating and terrifying for those who witness it from the outside, as it challenges the very fabric of social conformity.
Evolutionarily, being cast out from the tribe was a death sentence. Our brains are hardwired to view isolation as a threat to survival. This is why the modern urge to be alone feels so counterintuitive and even dark to our primal instincts. Joe, when we look at behavioral data, we see that the social pressure to fit in creates a constant state of low-level anxiety. Those who choose solitude are essentially overriding a million years of biological programming. They are trading the safety of the herd for the clarity of the wilderness. It is a high-stakes psychological trade-off that requires immense mental fortitude to sustain, as the mind must learn to provide its own security.
The internal world of a person who seeks solitude is not a vacant lot. It is a complex, often turbulent ecosystem. When we remove the distractions of other people's expectations, we are forced to confront our own thoughts in their rawest form. This is the dark side of the internal sanctuary. There is nowhere to hide from yourself. Many people fear being alone because they are afraid of the person they might meet in the mirror when no one else is watching. In solitude, the shadow becomes our only companion. To sit with one's own darkness without the buffer of conversation is an act of extreme psychological bravery that most avoid at all costs.
We must distinguish this healthy solitude from avoidant behaviors. In behavioral science, we look for the motive behind the isolation. Is it a retreat fueled by fear, or an advance fueled by growth? The dark psychology of wanting to be alone often involves a rejection of the superficial. It is a refusal to participate in the performative aspects of social life. This isn't necessarily a clinical detachment, but rather a hyper-attunement to the quality of one's own existence. By opting out of the social marketplace, the individual reclaims their cognitive resources. They are no longer spending energy on the maintenance of an image, but on the cultivation of an inner reality that is immune to public opinion.
There is a historical archetype for this, the monk or the hermit. These figures didn't flee society because they hated humanity. They fled because they loved the truth more. In psychological terms, this is the path towards self-actualization. To truly know who you are, you must temporarily kill the version of yourself that exists in the eyes of others. This social death is a prerequisite for a deeper psychological birth. It is a dark, lonely path, but it is the only one that leads to genuine autonomy. You have to be willing to be a ghost in your own life to eventually become the master of your own soul, free from the tethers of expectation.
We live in an era of hyper-connectivity, where our devices act as umbilical cords to the collective consciousness. This constant tethering erodes the boundaries of the self. The choice to be alone today is a form of digital and social fasting. It is a way to purge the noise and the otherness that we consume daily. Behavioral studies show that the fear of missing out is a potent driver of social anxiety. By choosing to be alone, one effectively kills this fear. You accept that you are missing everything, which allows you to finally be present for the only thing that matters, your own consciousness. It is a radical decoupling from the digital hive mind.
The silence of the ego is perhaps the most profound benefit of solitude. When we are around others, the ego is constantly performing, defending, and comparing. It is an exhausting, high-energy state. In solitude, the ego has no audience, and so it eventually goes quiet. This silence allows for a different kind of perception to emerge. You begin to observe your thoughts rather than being consumed by them. This is the dark peace. It is a stillness that feels like an abyss to the uninitiated, but to the seeker, it is the foundation of all true wisdom. It is where the chatter of I ends and the clarity of being begins.
From a cognitive standpoint, solitude is the forge of creativity. The brain needs downtime or default mode network activity to synthesize information. When we are constantly processing social cues, we lose the ability to engage in deep, focused work. High-level thinkers throughout history have often sought strategic isolation. It's not that they don't like people, it's that they value the integrity of their own thought process. Loneliness is the pain of being alone, but solitude is the glory of being alone. It is where the mind expands to fill the space left by others, allowing for insights that are impossible to reach in the crowded marketplace of ideas.
Many people confuse the fear of others with the love of self. If you are alone because you are terrified of judgment, that is a cage. But if you are alone because you find your own mind to be a fascinating landscape, that is a kingdom. The dark psychology here is the recognition that most social interaction is a distraction from the fundamental task of being human. We use others to buffer ourselves against the existential void. To sit alone in a room and be content is to have conquered the greatest fear of the modern age, the fear of nothingness. It is the realization that you are enough, even when there is no one there to witness it.
Behavioral patterns in solitude also reveal a unique form of emotional regulation. When you are alone, you are the sole architect of your emotional state. You cannot blame your bad mood on someone else, nor can you rely on someone else to fix it for you. This creates a radical form of self-responsibility. You learn to navigate the storms of your own psyche without a lighthouse. This can be a dark and difficult process, but it builds a psychological resilience that is impenetrable. You become a self-contained unit, capable of weathering any external chaos because you have mastered the internal. You are no longer a victim of the social climate surrounding you.
Philosophically, this echoes the concept of the overman. Thinkers recognized that the collective public is often a source of inauthenticity. To live authentically, one must pull away from the crowd and face the stark reality of their own existence. This is dark because it requires confronting mortality and the inherent lack of meaning in the universe. But in that void, the individual is free to create their own meaning. Solitude is the laboratory where this existential creation takes place, far from the prying eyes of social norms. It is a terrifying freedom, but it is the only freedom worth having, found only in the depths of one's own company.
We also need to talk about autonomy. In a world of surveillance and social credit, your privacy is your last true possession. Choosing to be alone is an act of reclamation. It is saying, my thoughts and my time are not for sale or for public consumption. This is a behavioral rebellion. By withdrawing, you deny the system the data it needs to categorize and manipulate you. There is a dark, subversive power in being off the grid psychologically. It is the only way to ensure that your desires and opinions are truly your own and not just echoes of a digital algorithm designed to keep you engaged.
Facing the shadow is perhaps the most clinical benefit of solitude. Most of us use social interaction as a way to suppress the parts of ourselves we don't like. We use the light of others to hide our own darkness. When you are alone, the lights go out and the shadow emerges. You have to look at your envy, your rage, your pettiness, and your grief. In therapy, patients who finally get a moment of silence often break down because the weight of what they've been avoiding finally hits them. But that breakdown is the beginning of a breakthrough. You cannot heal what you refuse to look at in the dark.
There is also the reality of social burnout. In behavioral science, we see social saturation, where the brain can no longer process the complexity of human interaction. The desire to be alone is the body's natural reset button. It's a physiological necessity. During these periods of withdrawal, the brain recalibrates. It's like a computer rebooting to clear its cache. Without this dark period of non-interaction, the psychological system eventually crashes, leading to chronic stress and a loss of empathy. Solitude is the cooling system for the overheated engine of the social self. It is a period of hibernation that allows for future participation in the world.
At the highest levels of this journey, we encounter a kind of transcendence. The distinction between the self and the world begins to blur. Paradoxically, the deeper you go into your own solitude, the more you feel connected to the universal human experience. You realize that your struggles, your fears, and your hopes are shared by all. This is the great irony. By leaving the company of people, you find a deeper connection to humanity. You move from the narrow ego to the observer of the cosmic play. This is the ultimate goal of the dark psychological path of solitude, to find the universe within the tiny point of your own existence.
This doesn't mean the solitary person never wants to see anyone again. On the contrary, when someone who values solitude chooses to spend time with you, it is a much higher compliment. They don't need you for entertainment or to escape themselves. They are choosing to share their space with you. This changes the dynamic of relationships from one of mutual dependency to one of mutual appreciation. It is a more honest way of relating. You come to the table as a whole person, not as a half looking for someone else to complete the puzzle. Solitude makes our connections more meaningful because they are no longer desperate.
Finally, there is the courage to be disliked. Choosing solitude often means saying no to expectations of family and friends. It requires a thick skin and a clear sense of priority. You will be called selfish or arrogant. Accepting this social darkness is the price of admission for internal light. If you cannot stand the thought of being misunderstood, you will never be free. The psychology of wanting to be alone is, at its core, the psychology of freedom. The freedom to be exactly who you are, without apology. It is the strength to stand alone in your truth, rather than living a lie in a crowded room.
As we conclude our exploration of the dark psychology of solitude, we leave you with this. Do not fear the quiet. It is not an empty void, but a fertile ground. Whether you seek it for creativity, for healing, or for existential clarity, aloneness is a tool, a sharp, difficult, but necessary instrument for the soul. It is the distance that allows us to see the world clearly, and the silence that allows us to hear our own voice. Thank you for joining us in this deep dive into the shadows. Remember, being alone is not a symptom. For many of us, it might just be the only real cure.